Hi, this is Jim Janossy. This is Chapter 15 in the Story of Art. In Chapter 15, we're going to be taking a look specifically at northern Italy, Tuscany and Rome, in the High Renaissance, that is, the late 1400s getting into the 1500s. And Gombrich calls this harmony attained because of the excellence of the artworks between color and detail and perspective combined into truly great works of art. Here's the time period we're looking at once again from 1350 to 1500. We're now in this area down here, the High Renaissance, from around 1450 to 1500. And we'll be taking a look at Da Vinci, Michelangelo, Raphael. We'll also be looking at Albrecht Dürer, but that's in a later chapter. So let's start off by wondering what's happening in Rome around 1500. A pope named Julius II is in place, and he has some very grandiose notions of replacing the church that served as St. Peter's Basilica with this grand structure here. Now notice this magnificent large dome. It may seem that this is on the same scale as the Pantheon in Rome also, but this was intended to be truly huge. People would be very, very tiny, even smaller than the little marks I'm putting on the screen right now. This was to be truly magnificent. Unfortunately, it was also going to be very expensive. So expensive, in fact, that various practices that the Pope put in place to collect money raised such a furor with various people, including Martin Luther, who was at the time a Catholic priest, that it eventually precipitated the Protestant Reformation in 1517. And for a number of reasons, that included this structure was never built. What stands in Rome now as St. Peter's Basilica is similar, as Gombrich points out, to this only in the huge size. In any case, an architect named Bramante was engaged to design this structure, and one tiny little study that he made for it, combining Greek columns and various Greek types of frieze, a dome, and a balustrade here that is in keeping with the design of this. A very tiny little tempietto, a little chapel, was intended to be surrounded by much larger structures in the same ilk, but it was never constructed either. We're going to be taking a look at Leonardo da Vinci. As a precursor to that, what Gombrich shows us is a work by Verrocchio, a sculptor in whose workshop Da Vinci learned his art. This is a sculpture by Verrocchio of a general named Bartolomeo Colleone. Let's take a closer look at this. Very interesting here, resembling in a way Roman statuary because it wasn't intended to glorify the body, but it looked very realistic, and down to the folds of the skin in the man's neck and the way that his brow creased and this detail. But overall, what we're seeing here is drama in this pose. This horse is arching forward. This soldier is ready for battle. We may picture him leading his troops into battle. There's nothing very staid about this. This is not a sculpture that's a depiction of somebody just standing there in a neutral pose. This man's ready for business. It comes across. Da Vinci learned an awful lot from that workshop. The reason Da Vinci is remembered as such a genius is he got into so many different kinds of things, so many different scientific investigations. It's reported that he dissected as many as 30 corpses in order to find out how various parts of the body worked. This looks like a trachea here going down to the lungs, and how the muscles worked under the skin, because he really wanted to be able to depict people in a very realistic way. But he also experimented with an awful lot of other kinds of things, and in a way was one of the earliest scientists because of his investigations of natural things. One of the things he's very well known for, is this Last Supper. Now, the Last Supper, the supper at which Jesus reveals to his apostles that one of them will betray him, and it's very close to the time of the crucifixion. That's been pictured many, many times in many different artworks, but here's an interesting picture of where that artwork of Da Vinci's Last Supper is actually housed. It was painted on this wall in what was the refectory, that is, the eating hall of a monastery. And you can see the placement of this is, it's very important to see it this way as opposed to just the picture itself, because you lose track of the fact that what Da Vinci did here with linear perspective, these are the actual walls of the refectory, and this is a wall. But by continuing with linear perspective here to a vanishing point, what he did was, on this flat surface, he used perspective to extend the room so that if you can imagine you're sitting here at tables eating, it's as if you're at the Last Supper too. The placement of this extended the dimensions of the room visually in this way with this, more or less, this optical illusion. We're going to take a look at the Last Supper in terms of composition and a number of other things. Here's just a portion of the fold-out from your textbook that shows the artwork in its present condition. Partly because Da Vinci was such a rabid experimenter, he was experimenting with different types of pigments and different types of binders. And he used them in this painting, and they didn't hold up very well. So unfortunately, in its present shape, this painting doesn't really do itself justice for us to understand what it looked like at the time that it was created. And I'm just going to show you this one for a second here because we want to take a look at the way perspective was used in this. If you trace these lines of perspective, you can arrive back at the sketch that Da Vinci must have made in order to create this. And you'll notice he picked out, right in the center of the painting, the vanishing point, and he put the head of Christ there. But it would be wrong to think that the vanishing point is the head of Christ. The vanishing point is way behind at the horizon back here with this landscape, which you notice has atmospheric perspective applied to it. So it's an attempt to be realistic in that way as well. Let's take a look at a different rendition of this very same painting so that you can see the composition a little better. What I'm going to show you is actually in an odd place. There's a rather Hollywood-like cemetery in Glendale, California, that has a reproduction of the Last Supper in stained glass. Now this is kind of interesting because stained glass is also an interesting medium from this time, but Da Vinci never worked in stained glass. So what you see here in stained glass, the reason I'm showing it to you is not because it's necessarily a great work of art in itself as a stained glass window, but just because it is much more vivid in terms of colors and you can see better what the original must have looked like when Da Vinci painted this. So here's a larger picture of it. And what it's interesting to see is that the way that Da Vinci has done this, he's used symmetry, and you can see here is a group of three and a group of three, balanced by a group of three and a group of three. But he's done this in such a way that you really don't see that as being awkward. He hasn't served that master of symmetry in such a way that it dominates to the detriment of reality. So you see Christ here in the middle. He's just made this announcement that one of his apostles will betray him. It was very typical at that time, when this kind of a painting was made, to isolate Judas. Judas is this character right here, and you can see, in fact, he's got a bag of money, which he was paid to betray Jesus. So in this case, though, he isn't isolated. He's in one of the groups. But what's happening here, what Da Vinci has done, and it was said that he spent days sometimes just looking at this painting and the next move that he would make and how he liked or didn't like what he had already drawn. You see here drama. This apostle raising his hands, that's the typical gesture of surprise. You see here an apostle with an upraised finger as if blame or an emphasis is being added. You see here a gesture, pointing. You see various other poses here. This looks very realistic. Because of the drama, it's not just 12 men seated around Jesus, all sitting there looking at their plates, as some of these Last Supper paintings. So a number of very interesting things here about the Last Supper that demonstrated the artistry that Da Vinci was capable of. And this is also in your slide set. It identifies who these apostles are.